Morning, everybody. Welcome to yet another session of MS Talks. Today, we're going to be talking about a very interesting initiative that we at MS Events are organizing called the Arab Green Summit, or TAGS as we like to call it fondly. The Arab Green Summit brings together the stakeholders across the Arab region to discuss, discover, and map out the latest practices and creative solutions while serving as a platform for climate champions to discuss, innovate, collaborate, and set the path for climate action through mitigation and adaptation. Joining us today, we have Ms. Eline Sleurink, head of the UK and Ireland and Middle East with the UN-supported Principles for Responsible Investment. Eline is the head of the UK and Ireland and the Middle East at the UN PRI, supporting over 800 signatories on their responsible investment journeys through tools, resources, and guidance. The PRI is the world's leading proponent of responsible investment. It works to understand the investment implications of ESG factors and to support its international network of investor signatories in incorporating these factors into their investment and ownership decisions. Alongside Eline, we have Dr. Jagannathan Ramaswamy, our conference chairman. He is very well known in the industry as an expert on energy, sustainability, and climate action, and has over 25 years of professional experience in this domain. Over to you, Dr. Jagan.
Thank you so much, Pritka. Morning, Eline. How are you?
Good, thank you. How are you?
I'm very fine, thank you. And thanks again for joining us from UK. And without much ado, I'll move to the first question. PRI's 6 principles of responsible investment. It provides a sort of framework for incorporating ESG or environmental social governance issues into investment decisions, isn't it? So as PRI, it will be interesting for me to know how exactly it kickstarts the conversation with signatories.
Yes, certainly. And thank you very much for this opportunity. So indeed, we've got 6 principles, and these are centered around ESG incorporation, active ownership, disclosure, promotion, and collaboration around the principles themselves, as well as reporting on progress. The principles are aspirational, and we work with our signatories to implement these, regardless of whether an investor is at the beginning of their responsible investment journey or more advanced. We will work with them to further their progress, which can then be measured through annual completion of the PRI's reporting framework. The PRI currently has close to 5,000 signatories, and this is a mix of asset owners, investment managers, and service providers across 18 key regions. And within each key region, we dedicate a team who works closely with investors to understand regional and contextual considerations, opportunities, and challenges. Because responsible investment obviously is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and it's important that we work with investors and markets on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, thank you so much. Moving on to basic investments, PRI actually is sort of driving climate action through responsible investments in such a manner that it nudges the economy towards net zero emissions. Now, talking from this region perspective, given that this region is heavily supported or backed up by fossil fuels, it has been the case so far, and it's trying to transition, and it has got net zero strategy as well. But given its background, what are your thoughts on this region's awareness on responsible investment, and how do you see them unfolding here in the wider MENA region?
Sure, it's a good question. So, the region is indeed one which has traditionally been reliant and exposed to fossil fuels. However, as you said, we've seen a range of net zero commitments come out of the region ahead of COP26 in particular, albeit with considerations to maintain energy security, which is important. Furthermore, again, as you've just mentioned, we have seen several plans to diversify economies in the region, including, for example, Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030. I think what is critical for the region is finding the balance between reaching net zero targets and its own energy security, so maintaining its own energy security. This is a nuanced picture overall of future. So there is this real opportunity here to think about, yes, energy transition and transition towards net zero emissions, whilst being mindful of the role that fossil fuels will play.
Thank you so much. It was quite helpful. My next question would be on the Arab Green Summit or TAGS. It was conceptualized to bring in all the stakeholders for a healthy and meaningful exchange of information and expertise. You would have seen from the contents that a lot of sectors, including ESG and finance, have been encapsulated within. So, on the face of it, what are your thoughts on the tags in terms of structure, content, lineup of speakers, and the timing?
Sure. I think the timing of the event is critical and hugely welcomed. COP26 in Glasgow saw a host of net zero announcements and commitments, as we've already discussed, both at country, corporate, and investor level. Now, in the aftermath of COP26, and as we move towards the next COPs, it is critical that we actually implement robust climate action. Commitments and announcements are not enough. We actually need to see evidence of short-term targets and accountability mechanisms. And in order for this to work, we need action across industries and sectors. The actions of one industry or one sector, let's say the financial industry, in silo won't be enough. This is why a summit such as TAGS, which looks at different stakeholders, as you said, and looks at different sectors, is really welcomed. And I think a real life example of that is the most recent IPCC report highlights the need of smart, energy efficient urban planning and the use of technologies. So it's great to see this reflected as conversation pieces during the summit.
Thank you so much. PRI, sustainable finance, sustainable investment, non-financial disclosures such as GRI or SASP or whatever, these have really got into mainstream in EU, UK, and other nations as well. Now, what are your views on that picking up momentum in a region such as MENA and UAE in particular? And if you want to focus on specific sectors, it's fine, but I would love to hear your overall your perspective on how they plan to unfold in this region.
Sure. So from a PRI perspective, we currently have 30 signatories in the Middle East region, a majority of which actually are based in the UAE specifically. Okay. And we actually jumped from 12 signatories in the region at the end of 2020 to 26 by the end of 2021. So this, I think, is clearly indicative of the uptake and rising importance of responsible investment and ESG considerations. I can really see that the momentum is there. And overall, I think it is only natural that the momentum will increase in the region on account of the climate action which needs to be taken, the role these countries play on account of their typically, as we've discussed, oil-dependent economies, and the role the region can play overall at both COP27 and COP28. If we think about different sectors, certainly the financial sector has a huge role to play, but also, as you've mentioned, and as we've briefly discussed, thinking about urban planning and at corporate level, there's, I think, overall a lot of momentum coming out of the region, and the time is really ripe for different sectors to work together and think about the path towards net zero.
That's interesting. I'm aware that PRI sets the scene for responsible investments, but there are several frameworks. In fact, PRI, I would consider that as a foundation or the vision. But there are several frameworks out there in the market which are used by businesses to demonstrate their commitment to sustainability and climate action. We have the TCFD, SASB, GRI, CDP, UN Sustainable Development Goals, and so many. So when there are so many frameworks coming into picture, obviously the businesses are going to get confused. Or I would like to know where exactly these things would align to a specific business. For instance, if I am a bank, so what should I do to demonstrate my commitment to sustainability or net zero or climate action? Should I go through TCFD or should I start with PRI? It's actually confusing and market needs clarity. So it will be good to hear it from your end.
Yeah, definitely. I think, it's often called there's this alphabet soup going on of lots of different frameworks and regulations. And it is confusing, considering the work that the PRI does. So we have kind of a blueprint or a flagship target called driving meaningful data throughout markets. And the aim of this pillar of the work that we do is to enable the flow of reliable and comparable data from corporations through the investment chain to beneficiaries and clients. because signatories regularly report to the PRI that a lack of consistent and comparable ESG data is a substantial barrier to their responsible investment practices. So since then, the PRI has contributed to efforts aimed at harmonizing corporate ESG reporting. So we're continuing to do this in the interest of investor decision-making, both for risk and return and assessing the sustainability performance of corporate entities. This essential work continues, but it is only part of the overall pursuit of driving meaningful data for responsible investors. So in terms of a bank, if we use that example, and where should they start? I think, yes, you might turn to an organization such as the PRI to see how we are globally looking at these different standards. What are our opinions of these standards and our frameworks? We're not a standard setter ourselves, which is useful in the sense that we can have a sort of holistic overview of the different framework and standards out there. But I also think it's a question for, an organization like a bank to think about the quality of the end data that they will generate. How can we ensure that the data that we generate is the most useful from a sustainability perspective, and letting that drive the generation of the data? So make sure that whatever framework or disclosures framework you're using will lead to the most sustainability useful data for investors and any other end users.
I think this would be quite useful to the listeners. Thanks so much. Another question, the term that's very widely used, that's a greenwashing. When there are more of frameworks, more of frameworks in this manner, all acting at the same time, there's bound to be greenwashing. So how do you plan to overcome greenwashing as in the space of responsible investment? Do you see any barriers?
So I think actually, concerns around greenwashing in a sense are healthy, because they indicate that ESG labels and messaging are no longer just being taken at face value. Now that ESG is becoming more mainstream, we need this level of scrutiny. So I think one of the first key steps to counter greenwashing is to critically reflect, whether you're a corporate or an investor or, any type of entity, reflect on your policies, your processes, your capabilities. Where can you justify and really justify your messaging and evidence your claims around ESG? And where is this more tenuous? What evidence or perhaps external validation can you use to support your claims? An example might be reference to the Sustainable Development Goals. I think rather than an investor saying they loosely contribute to all 17 SDGs, I think there's more merit in saying you can irrefutably contribute to 2 very well, backing this up with evidence. So the speed and the uptake of global regulation will naturally play a role in countering greenwashing, and we welcome those that drive transparency in the industry. But a barrier here perhaps lies in diverging standards and regulations. So there's a balance to be found in driving global responsible investment regulation, which furthers responsible investment whilst being mindful of local practice and context.
Yeah, I think a greater data credibility and materiality would go a long way in overcoming greenwashing, isn't it? Yeah, and I think definitely. I would move on to the last question.
Yeah.
What would be your message to the listeners through the prism of the Arab Green Summit or tags?
Sure. So my message would be that for net zero commitments and climate action to work on a country or market level, we need collaboration from the whole ecosystem and a vast cross-section of sectors and actors. It is not sufficient to just expect the public sector or private sector or one particular industry to drive net zero. We all need to play our part as consumers, investors, businesses, urban planners, regulators, to name just a few. So for this reason, it is fantastic to see the Arab Green Summit bring the ecosystem together in the region to collectively look at the road to COP28, climate change mitigation and adaptation, and net zero commitments.
Eline, it was a pleasure having you. Thank you so much for being with us, and we look forward to seeing you at tags. Have a great day.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Jagan. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Pleasure too.
Thank you for the extremely insightful discussions, both Eline and Dr. Jagan. I'm sure everybody watching has enjoyed the session immensely, and see you all at the Arab Green Summit. Thank you.